Hi everyone. Welcome back to philosophy. I hope that you're all doing well and that your semester's going well. Um, yeah. So this is the week where your papers are due, so might be slightly more stressful than other weeks. So I hope that it's not too stressful, but that'll be due on Thursday at your scheduled class time, just as a reminder. And I wanted to go over, I've read a couple of rough drafts, and I think the major thing to keep in mind is that, and this is hard to explain, so I've tried to explain it, but I'm going to try again and hopefully be clear. So, whenever you write a philosophy paper, in some sense, it is opinionated, but it's not like an opinion piece. Like, it's not like I think this, I feel this way, I like this, I don't like this. None of those phrases should be in your paper anywhere. It should be, you want to focus on the argument that you're analyzing and that you're critiquing. So, for example, I'm going to try and give an example of of a thesis that is opinionated in some sense, but is what you're supposed to be doing. So, you can say something like, I will be arguing against Louise Antony's argument from no good reason. And as you can see, like, that is an opinion, because obviously if you're arguing that, then you have the opinion that that's not a good argument. Or you have the opinion that what she says is not true. But your paper is not going to be you saying, I think this is not true because I think that the world looks like this. Or I don't think this is true because I believe in God. And so because I believe in God, I obviously don't think that this is true. Even though, like, that could be totally true and you're totally allowed to have that opinion, and that can influence, I mean, if you believe in God, then you probably are disagreeing with Louise Antony. But your paper doesn't need to be about that. It needs to be about, why is the argument itself unsuccessful? And so you're not going to be like, I don't like this argument, because that's not important. What's important is you demonstrating whether the argument is successful or unsuccessful. So that's kind of where it's not very, like, it's not like a rant or like just laying out your opinion. You're trying to show, this is my point, and these are my subpoints that are supporting my main point. So, always focus on the argument. It's good to bring in external information, but it can be distracting. So, this is from a section on religion. So, if you were to bring in the Bible, that might be distracting to the overall argument, because you would kind of need to give reasons for why the Bible is reliable, and then you're moving too far away from your thesis. So you want it to be focused. You want your points to be very relevant. And you don't want it to come off like a Facebook post or something like that. You want it to come off as an academic paper. So, like I've said before, reading something like Eleanor Stump's paper or Antony's paper that are like more modern philosophy, those should help you learn how to arrange your paper and kind of how to speak philosophically. So you've read these things, they're in your brain, you just kind of have to work to get them out. And it is hard the first time. The second time will probably be a little bit easier, even if it's longer. So yeah. Trying to think if there's anything else to say about that. Oh, one thing that people have been asking that I didn't clarify well enough, which I'm going to try and send an email about. Do include a works cited or footnotes or something to cite your sources. Obviously, I know your main source is going to be the book. So the more important thing is to be sure to tell me like the page number that you're getting your quote from or something like that. And especially if you use other sources, yes, be sure absolutely to include a works cited. Always cite your sources. It's good to show where you're getting your information and everything like that. So yeah, definitely do that. Okay, so, you may think you're in good cardiovascular health, and then you talk to yourself straight for 10 minutes, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, I can't breathe. It happens to me every time I do this, so. Anyways, and I always do these at the end of the day typically, so, losing steam. I should try to do them in the morning. Anyways, that's also why I don't look my best right now. But anyways, it's not important. This is the life we live right now. Virtual, remote, those things aren't as important. So, all right, on to the material. We're sticking with epistemology for this week. And last week we talked about, we talked about Descartes and Hume and how we can know things at all. And it's good that we did Descartes last week because we read his first meditation last week. We're reading his second meditation for today. So you kind of you're catching the flow of what he's doing, what his writing is like, because we're reading it back to back, consecutive. So that's good. The question for this week's reading is mind material? And this is a question that people still deal with today. In undergrad, I went to a debate between two philosophers arguing. One argued that the mind is immaterial, and the other argued that the mind is actually material. And there's different arguments for both sides. Most of the time, if you have a religious leaning, then you would think that the mind is immaterial. Not always, but that it definitely is the case for the modern era of philosophy with Descartes and Hume and stuff. Hume was not admittedly, but he was less religious, and he didn't really see a need for the mind to be immaterial, so he argued that it was material. So first we're just kind of go through a few different theories of the mind, because people are talking about this right now today in philosophy, so there's a lot of different theories, new ones popping up. So the book starts with an example of a chunk of ice. So you have a chunk of ice and everything, it's made up of transparent crystals, right? But whenever you have a snowball, which is composed of small chunks of ice, it's not transparent, but the chunk of ice is transparent. But the snowball is not transparent. So it seems like there's something missing from this. There's something not being explained by chemical properties or by physical characteristics. There seems to be something else going on, even though it can be explained by being H2O molecules bonded together. That doesn't explain everything that we're experiencing. So then they give the example of a virus, that a virus is genetic material, and it's made up of complex molecules, and we assume it's a wholly material thing. It's completely material. And they're not counted as living things, but you see a living thing like bacterium. Why do we consider that to be a living thing? So there's a theory called vitalism, which says that a special vital spirit has to be there in order to explain life. But because of this distinction between bacteria and viruses for sure. I got distracted by viruses. You just don't hear that often. Anyways, because of the distinction between those two, vitalism isn't really credible. So anyways, it just kind of makes you think, okay, why do we consider some things living and some things not living, when they seem to be both wholly material? So one thing that we have to think about as humans is our mental states. So our mind has certain mental states: thinking, feeling, perceiving. Our mind does all of those things. Can all of those things be explained by physical states of our brain? It's debatable, obviously. Leibniz, who was another philosopher from the modern period, from 1714, gives an example of a machine. So he says, suppose that there be a machine, the structure of which produces thinking, feeling, and perceiving. Imagine this machine enlarged, but preserving the same proportions, so that you could enter it as if it were a mill. This being supposed, you might visit its inside, but what would you observe there? Nothing but parts which push and move each other, and never anything that could explain perception. So perception is an important thing. It's what our brains are doing. It's what we as humans do whenever we look around and we take things in. So if we imagine that machine as being our brain, and we walk into our brain and see all the different things going on, we could see all these moving parts, but could we actually see something that explains perception or thinking or feeling? That's an important question. And that's what we're trying to answer with this. So this kind of puzzle is called the mind-body problem. And in modern philosophy, as we've kind of talked about, it's one of the most important. That's why the modern period is marked by Descartes being a dualist or Hume being a not dualist. It was a super important question then, and it still is now, just in a different way. So there's a few different theories out there to explain the mind-body problem. So the first one we'll talk about is called behaviorism. And according to behaviorism, to have a mind or to be in certain mental states just is to behave in certain ways, or to be disposed or inclined to behave in certain ways. So basically, behavior demonstrates mental states. So if our mental states are just a matter of our behavior, then it kind of solves the problem of the mind-body problem, because it shows that a purely material object can have a mind. So it's the same as if I lift my arm, right? I'm lifting my arm. That's a behavior, and it's going up because my muscle fibers are doing certain things and all of the anatomy things. And we never need to assume, in this case, me lifting my hand, that I'm more than a physical thing, because it's just a mechanical movement. Like, this is happening because all my muscles are interacting in a certain way together in order to make this happen. So the behaviorist would say that that's the same thing that's happening with our brains. We respond to certain things, we do all these things just as behaviors, just as behaviors that are happening because of our mental states. So, let's see. So there's an objection to this, and it is, imagine someone who is completely paralyzed except that he's able to move his left eyelid. He can't perform any behaviors pretty much, but there's no reason to think that he doesn't have mental states happening, that he's not thinking consciously. So the behaviorist would have to say that this person isn't actually thinking because there's no behavior coming out of them. So that creates a problem for the behaviorist. It kind of demonstrates that complex behaviors, even though they're evidence of a mental life, is not what it is to have a mind. So behaviors reacting in certain ways, they're not the same as having a mind. Not the same thing, but they could be evidence for the mind. So then we move on to the identity theory, and let's see. So if thinking, perceiving, and feeling are inner states that cause behavior, then we might expect that science will tell us what they are. So the identity theory relies on science to tell us about the mind. So they kind of put it in terms of property identity. So, and property just means a feature or attribute. The first property of having a brain and the second property of, let's see, did I get that right? Okay, sorry. The first property of desiring something or perceiving something is the exact same property as having a brain firing certain neurons at a certain time. So the act of the mind and the actual neurological movement going on is the same exact thing. It's also called the brain process thesis. So, for example, science has told us that the property of being table salt is the exact same property of being sodium chloride. Those are the exact same things. So, to have a sensation is simply to have a certain physical process occurring in one's brain. There's nothing more to it than that. There's a physical process happening in the brain, and it makes you have certain thoughts, feelings, perceptions. So, we have another problem with this. And with each theory, you're always going to have objections, and people respond to these objections with rebuttals, and so you can still defend them. These are just kind of basic objections that come up. So, imagine just an android, once again, just like a computer person, that has like a machine brain rather than a biological brain. So there's no neurons happening. So the android can desire water, but there's no actual neurological process going on whenever that happens. So if the identity theory is correct, then the android cannot have a mental life at all, just because it doesn't have an actual biological brain. So that would be an objection to that. All right. Then we have functionalism, which is that basically instead of let's see. Sorry. The identity theory kind of focuses on the hardware of the brain, and functionalism narrows in on the software. So what that means is functionalism focuses on the actual nerves interacting in certain ways to create particular sensations. Functionalism focuses on, your brain is programmed in a certain way with software that results in a mind. So this could explain away the android problem, because you could just say that there is a software in the android. So there is a program software there. So it's still able to function as a mind. So what matters is that the right program is running in the mind, not whether it is running on a particular system. So in general, mental states are identical to functional states. Functional states are those that perform a certain function. For instance, the function of causing a certain piece of information to be stored for subsequent use in a long calculation. Different things can be made up of all different kinds of things, but they still function the same. Okay, for example, let's say, I'm trying to think. Let's say like a juicer. So you could have a juicer that you put into this thing and then you pull a lever and it juices it. You could have a juicer where you put the citrus or whatever on top of it, you press it down and then it spins and gets the juice out. You could have one where it's just a little handheld, you put the lemon in, squeeze it, comes out. All different kinds of ways. And those are all different, made differently. They're all different hardwares, but they all operate with the same function, and they all do the same thing. So that's kind of what functionalism is promoting. That every brain doesn't have to look the same and have the same hardware, but that there is a particular software programming in it. And it is the dominant theory today in most cases. So it's always interesting to note, because that was not the case in Descartes' time. Functionalism didn't really exist at the time. So now we have more information, more things going on. Just because it's the dominant theory doesn't mean that it's the best one, but a lot of people believe it, I suppose. So then the last one is the one we're going to be probably most familiar with, because we're reading quite a bit of Descartes. So dualism is that the mind is not material. So the rest of the theories that we just talked about, identity theory, functionalism, or the others, behaviorism, all those are claim that the mind is material. Dualism is just that it's not material. So the mind is something entirely different. So you have two things, mind, body, they're separate things. That's where you get the name dualism. And that was the dominant theory up until probably really recently, maybe up until 1900s. So it goes all the way back to Plato, who was at the beginning of our philosophical timeline. And Descartes obviously gives a famous defense of it. And we're about to dive into that. So those are just some basic theories. And yeah.